13 times, black pastors got exposed, faking miracles, live on stage. What if the miracles you believed in were nothing but stage tricks, from pastors kissing for healing to spraying insecticide in desperate faces? These are not rumors, they were caught on camera for the world to see. Faith, fame, and fortune collided in the most unbelievable ways, leaving entire congregations questioning everything. Before you decide who's a prophet and who's a performer, buckle up. This journey will shake what you thought you knew about modern-day miracles. Subscribe to Legends of Black Excellence now and join the debate that has believers and skeptics clashing worldwide. Nana Poku. Prophet Nana Poku became one of the most talked-about pastors in South Africa after a video of his so-called healing methods shocked the internet. Leading a church in Rustenburg, he rose to fame not through powerful sermons or community outreach, but through one controversial act that left millions of viewers stunned. The video shows Nana Poku in the middle of a worship service surrounded by assistants and a curious congregation. Suddenly, he leans in and kisses a woman on the lips, passionately and dramatically, claiming the act was divinely inspired to cure her illness. As people around shouted prayers of gratitude, cameras captured every second. Within days, the clip spread like wildfire across social media, sparking outrage memes and heated debates about whether this was authentic faith healing or theatrical manipulation. Nana Poku defended himself by insisting the kiss was a channel for God's power, claiming miracles don't always follow human logic. Supporters argued people felt healed and spiritually renewed after such encounters. Critics weren't buying it. They questioned the absence of medical proof, the unusual theatrics, and the ethics of performing such intimate acts under the guise of religion. For many, this incident symbolized a bigger problem: pastors blending spirituality with sensationalism to capture crowds' attention and donations. The stage setup, assistants ready on cue, and the dramatic delivery all hinted at performance rather than divine power. More troubling were accounts of desperate followers traveling long distances hoping for healing, only to be met with public spectacles instead of real solutions. Despite the backlash, Nana Poku stood firm, continuing his ministry and claiming divine instruction guided every action. He never provided scientific proof or documented testimonies of healing from his holy kisses. As criticism mounted, questions about accountability, consent, and the exploitation of faith only grew louder. His name remains tied to that viral moment, a pastor at the center of a global conversation about modern-day miracles, the power of belief, and the risk of blind faith. Whether seen as a genuine man of God or a master of publicity, Nana Poku forced the world to face a hard reality in an age of cameras and instant exposure. Every act done in the name of faith will be judged by both believers and skeptics alike. Victor Kanyari. Victor Kanyari is a Kenyan pastor whose name has become synonymous with scandal, deception, and the abuse of trust under the guise of miracle working. Leading the Salvation Healing Ministry, he built a reputation on bold promises, cures for HIV, cancer, infertility, and grand healings. But critics say behind the spectacle stood a pattern of trickery, coaching, and financial exploitation. The unraveling began in 2014 when a televised investigative program titled Prayer Predators exposed many of Kanyari's methods. Church insiders came forward admitting they had been coached to give false testimonies. One former pastor claimed the congregation was instructed how to talk, when to cry, even when to fall down in apparent healing. Kanyari is said to have washed believers' feet with water laced with potassium permanganate, a chemical that turns pink when dissolved, which he claimed symbolized divine blood of healing. Witnesses also alleged that some congregants were paid or pressured to stage illnesses. After the broadcast, the Kenyan government moved swiftly. New religious bodies were prohibited from registering, and regulations on existing churches tightened. Kanyari admitted in media interviews that he had encouraged scripted testimonies, but insisted many had genuinely experienced blessings as well. While under public pressure, He tried to defend his ministry as legitimate and said critics misunderstood the nature of spiritual healing. Even years later, Kanyari remains controversial. Social media posts accuse him of paying people KSH 8,000 USD 50 a 70 to theatrically fall during services, an expose published in 2024 by Bungoma Goliath. Other reports show him demanding KSH 310 from worshippers ahead of miracles, using biblical tithing passages to justify such payments. His return to public platforms, radio shows, online broadcasts has not softened scrutiny. Rather, it fueled new debates about the morality of his methods and the boundaries of religious leadership. Critics emphasize that faith cannot replace verifiable evidence. They argue that theatrics, chemical tricks, coached confessions, and mandatory payments betray genuine spirituality. Defenders, however, still point to testimonies people who claimed improvement, peace, or spiritual breakthrough. Yet those testimonies are difficult to verify without medical records or follow-up. Kanyari's saga illustrates broader problems faced by societies where poverty, illness, and desperation intertwine with religion. For vulnerable believers, a promise of healing can feel like the only path out of suffering. But when spiritual leadership turns into a performance backed by monetary demands, trust becomes fragile and faith becomes vulnerable to abuse. Whether you see Kanyari as corrupt or charismatic, his story forces every viewer to ask, how do we protect genuine belief from exploitation? In the world of flashy crusades and viral videos, every miracle claim deserves scrutiny, not just applause. Modestus Chilaka. Reverend Father Modestus Chilaka is one of the more bizarre names on the list of exposed miracle preachers, and his case hinges on a spectacle involving a lizard. He operated in Nigeria. Oji River, Enugu State area is often cited claiming to perform deliverance and healing services. But what listeners expected as spiritual warfare turned into something many would call theatrical deception. In one infamous service, Reverend Father Chilaka conducted an exorcism or deliverance session in which a man was purportedly under demonic influence. As part of his ritual, he asked the congregation to behold what was happening in the heavens. At that moment, supposed evidence of the spirit was delivered, or so he claimed. But an off-angle camera revealed something else. One of his aides dropped a live lizard onto the stage floor, and the crowd was told the creature had been expelled from the possessed person. In other words, what the pastor framed as a moment of divine intervention may have been nothing more than a hidden animal trick. After exposure, many locals confronted him, and he was reportedly chased out of the village. Protesters demanded he explain the origin of the lizard, why it appeared when no one expected it, and why none of the spiritual claims aligned with the visual evidence. Some witnesses say villagers were outraged, feeling their faith had been manipulated for spectacle rather than service. Certainly, the optics were harsh assistance props, sudden drama, and a symbol, the lizard, that played heavily into fear and supernatural imagery. The pastor had claimed mysterious authority, toggling between Catholic and Anglican titles depending on context. In fact, critics say he misrepresented his clerical affiliation to amplify his perceived legitimacy among different audiences. What works in his defense historically is that Reverend Father Chilaka has rarely produced verifiable follow-up evidence, medical reports, detailed testimonies, or consistent proof that healing or deliverance continued beyond that dramatic act. Because almost all the attention centers on that lizard stunt, it overshadows any other ministry work he may have done, if indeed there was any. In the shadow of his exposure, his case is often cited as a warning that charisma and theatrical boldness can overshadow integrity. He may have fooled some in the moment, but a video lens is impartial. Once deception is revealed, trust fractures. Whether Chilaka ever returns to public ministry or continues in obscurity, the lizard episode remains a haunting image, one that forces believers and skeptics alike to reassess the boundaries between faith performance and manipulation. Penuel Manguni. Penuel Manguni gained infamy across South Africa and some parts of Africa beyond as the snake pastor, having built his ministry on shocking extreme demonstrations rather than conventional preaching. Leading End Times Disciples Ministries, he became notorious for requiring congregants to ingest snakes, rats, even dog meat, in some cases supposedly to prove faith or to be delivered. The controversy first erupted around 2015 to 2016, when photos and videos surfaced showing Manguni handing live snakes to churchgoers and in some instances compelling them to swallow or chew on the reptiles. He cited passages like Mark 16:16-18 and Romans 14 as justification, interpreting them to mean believers could eat anything, including deadly things, if faith were strong enough. He defended his actions by claiming that because no one died under his watch, the practices were validated by God's protection. As public backlash grew, animal welfare organizations such as the NSPCA filed complaints. Authorities reportedly arrested him in 2015 following a complaint of cruelty, though the case was eventually dropped due to insufficient evidence. Meanwhile, the government and religious communities both condemned his methods. Some say the National Interfaith Council warned that his practices went beyond scriptural boundaries and endangered congregants. As the years went on, accusations escalated. In 2018, reports emerged alleging he had fed dog meat to congregants during communion. The NSPCA announced an intention to investigate this new claim. His church allegedly also introduced other bizarre acts, feeding rats, pushing people to consume unusual items, even using simulacra of living things in ceremonies. Yet Manguni later claimed that he had repented of these practices. At a service in Nigeria, he testified that listening to Pastor T.B. Joshua helped him see that his earlier actions were not scriptural. He said he misread the Bible and asked for deliverance from the ritualistic extremes he once endorsed. He also asserted that the controversies were misinterpreted or exaggerated. Critics argue that what he did was less about spiritual doctrine and more about sensationalism. Even supporters concede that his later recanting suggests awareness that some actions crossed ethical or spiritual lines. Because most attention centers on the shock value snakes, animal flesh, dramatic staging, very little credible documentation exists of long-term healing transformation or pastoral care that followed. His legacy is often tied to the images and controversies more than theological substance. Whether you think he was a misguided zealot or a manipulative showman, Penuel Manguni's story forces deeper reflection. How far should religious leaders go in proving faith? And when does a miracle turn into folly under the gaze of public scrutiny? Lucy Natasha. Reverend Lucy Natasha is one of Kenya's most recognizable and talked-about preachers, leading the Empowerment Christian Church and building a ministry marked by glamour, confidence, and a powerful online presence. Known for her designer outfits, luxury cars, and vibrant preaching style, she has managed to attract both loyal followers and fierce critics. Her name has repeatedly surfaced in controversies ranging from alleged staged miracles to accusations of cult-like control within her church. At one point, social media erupted over claims of inappropriate relationships and financial exploitation involving her ministry. Natasha responded publicly, insisting the allegations were false and framed by people seeking to tarnish her reputation. Despite her denials, conversations around her ministry's methods didn't fade away. Critics argue that many of her healing services follow a strikingly similar pattern: dramatic build-ups, intense prayer moments, and highly emotional testimonies. These, they claim, appear too rehearsed to be genuine. Supporters, on the other hand, see her as a bold woman breaking barriers in a religious environment often dominated by men. Some accusations even claim that congregants were asked for large seed offerings in exchange for blessings or anointing prayers. While such claims remain unproven, they fueled the ongoing debate about the commercialization of faith and whether churches risk turning spirituality into a business. Natasha, however, has never shied away from the spotlight. She uses television broadcasts, social media platforms, and public events to expand her reach, portraying herself as a modern-day preacher who blends faith with sophistication. Her followers call her a role model, citing her charitable works, mentorship programs, and inspiring sermons as proof of her authenticity. But skeptics remain unconvinced, pointing to the repeated controversies as red flags. They argue that a true spiritual leader should emphasize humility and accountability rather than glamour and spectacle. What cannot be denied is Lucy Natasha's ability to command attention. Whether preaching to packed auditoriums or streaming live to thousands online, she speaks with authority and confidence. Yet the questions surrounding her ministry persist, leaving the public divided between those who see her as a trailblazer and others who view her as a symbol of excess within modern churches. In the end, Lucy Natasha represents a larger debate about faith, image, and leadership in today's world. Is she a visionary redefining what it means to be a preacher, or a product of a culture where charisma often overshadows substance? Lucy Nduta, prophetess Lucy Nduta, has a deeply controversial legacy centered on her claims of miraculous healings, particularly for HIV/AIDS, and her extremely aggressive tactics. Born in Kenya, she built influence partly through her son Victor Kanyari, whose ministry faced major exposés. Yet, Nduta's own methods drew even sharper scrutiny, and her story remains one of faith scandal and human tragedy. Nduta's most serious accusations involve her offering miracle clinics that claimed to cure HIV/AIDS through prayer, spiritual deliverance, and other supernatural means. No conventional medicine or antiretroviral therapy was supposed to be needed. She charged registration or deposit fees in Kenya shillings to participate, promising divine healing for those who believed and paid. Many patients desperate for a cure were convinced to abandon medical treatment and put all hopes in her ministry. Several reports say that after her cure, pronouncements follow-up tests still showed unchanged viral loads. In effect, some patients died or remained untreated, despite believing they had been healed. Over time, Kenyan authorities charged her with fraud and misleading the sick. She was convicted on multiple counts related to false health claims and received a prison sentence which some accounts place at 2 years. Upon release, her reputation remained deeply tarnished, and her ministry never fully recovered in public trust. The tactics she used were disturbingly systematic. She would insist on physical visits to her clinic, sometimes far from patients' homes. Her staff allegedly coerced attendance and pressured vulnerable people who had invested in her promises. She issued certificates to proclaim healing even though no clinical data or medical oversight backed them. Her messages often framed critics as enemies of faith, labeling challenges as persecution or spiritual attack. Critics view her case as one of the deadliest combinations religion weaponized against science. Supporters and followers argue that some experienced psychological relief, spiritual peace, or renewed hope, which they considered part of the healing process. Yet such subjective effects cannot substitute for physical disease control in the case of HIV. Her downfall serves as a cautionary tale for communities where poverty, illness, and desperation intersect with faith. Nduta's ministry shows how spiritual authority, when unchecked, can amplify harm. Though she is no longer a dominant figure in the public eye, the scars remain among those who lost loved ones to believing promises she could not keep. Ezekiel Odero. Pastor Ezekiel Odero, leader of the New Life Prayer Center and Church in Kilifi County, Kenya, rose from humble beginnings to become one of the nation's most prominent televangelists. Known for his massive crusades, promises of healing, and charismatic preaching style, he attracted tens of thousands of followers seeking spiritual breakthroughs. Yet in 2023, his ministry became the center of a scandal that shook Kenya and raised global attention. Investigators linked his church to the horrifying events surrounding the Shakahola forest cult, where hundreds of bodies were eventually discovered in shallow graves. Authorities claimed that some victims had ties to Ezekiel's ministry, sparking outrage and disbelief among Kenyans who had once viewed him as a man of God. The government responded swiftly, closing his church, evacuating more than 100 people from his compound, and arresting the pastor on multiple charges, including murder, aiding suicide, radicalization, and money laundering. Ezekiel admitted through his legal team that at least 15 people had died on his premises, but insisted these were sick individuals seeking prayers, not victims of foul play. Still, critics questioned why a place of worship had so many unexplained deaths, and why bodies were reportedly moved to mortuaries without proper documentation. Even more disturbing were allegations that the church ran its own morgue, fueling suspicions of a larger coordinated cover-up. Supporters defended Ezekiel, portraying him as a man wrongfully accused, a preacher whose growing influence made him a target. They argued that many allegations lacked conclusive evidence and that his charity work and powerful sermons spoke to his genuine faith. Yet investigators insisted the sheer scale of the tragedy demanded accountability, leading to the deregistration of his ministry alongside several others. The Shakahola incident became one of Kenya's darkest chapters, revealing how desperation, manipulation, and unchecked religious authority can turn deadly. Whether Ezekiel Odero is ultimately convicted or cleared, his name is now forever tied to a story where faith collided with fear and spiritual devotion ended in mass graves. This case forces believers and skeptics alike to confront uncomfortable truths. Where should society draw the line between religious freedom and public safety? And when does faith stop being hope and start becoming danger? Paul Sanyangor. Pastor Paul Sanyangor shot to infamy when a video circulated showing him holding a cell phone to his ear during a church service, claiming he was speaking to God, live on the line. In the middle of the gathering, he asks, "Hello, is this heaven? What do you have to say about this woman?" as though God were responding in real time. The stunned crowd watches as he relays personal revelations. He says, "Your children, one is asthmatic, another epileptic." He then proclaims to the congregation, "Heaven is online." He asserts he was granted a direct line to the Almighty during prayer, insisting that God called him first and handed him the number. According to him, this connection allows him to receive guidance instructions and divine insight anytime he dials. He promised that at the right moment he would share that number with his congregation. Certainly his claim baffled many. Critics argue this kind of theatrics aligns more with psychic or medium performances than traditional Christian prophetic ministry. Some observers liken it to earlier televangelist controversies, where hotlines to God became methods of showmanship and spectacle. Others propose he may have been using earpieces or prearranged cues, all to produce the impression of a divine telephone call in front of a church audience. Supporters of Sanyangor point to testimonies from congregants who say meaningful revelations followed these calls, that their lives were changed, and that the messages he delivered bore spiritual fruit. They argue that modern communication shouldn't limit how the divine interacts with humanity, and that creativity in prayer should be welcomed. Yet the burden of proof is high. No one has produced independent verification of divine responses. No recordings from God, no third-party corroboration that cannot be explained by human design. The spectacle itself becomes the central focus, overshadowing claims of healing transformation or long-term discipleship. With such claims, the line between faith and performance is perilously thin. Paul's story taps into bigger questions facing charismatic movements. How do we evaluate strange claims? How much credence should we give to personal prophecy? And what safeguards should exist when a leader's credibility depends on sensational acts? In an era where cameras follow every moment, a pastor's claim to talk to God by phone becomes instant content and instant controversy. Whether you view Sanyangor as a visionary communicator of modern faith or a provocateur of extreme theatrics, his method forces every believer to confront a fundamental issue. Does faith require spectacle, or does true conviction stand even in silence? Chris Okafor. Pastor Chris Okafor, founder of the Mountain of Liberation and Miracle Ministry in Nigeria, built his reputation on dramatic healing crusades and bold prophetic declarations. Known for his energetic style and massive gatherings, he quickly rose to prominence as one of Nigeria's influential televangelists. His services often featured people claiming to be healed from chronic illnesses, restored from broken homes, or delivered from spiritual oppression. For many followers, He became a symbol of hope, a man believed to carry divine power. But his ministry faced serious controversy when allegations surfaced that some of his most publicized miracles were staged. A woman named Bose Olasunkanmi came forward claiming she had been paid to pose as a sick person with a twisted arm, only to receive healing in front of cheering congregants. Her story took the internet by storm when she alleged that multiple pastors, including Okafor, had used her in similar performances, paying her to act out dramatic before and after scenes for the cameras. She explained that an old injury had given her the ability to twist her arm into unnatural positions. Rather than seek medical treatment, she said pastors saw an opportunity to turn her condition into a spectacle. According to her, she performed this miracle healing routine at different churches, collecting payment each time. Videos even circulated showing the same woman appearing in several crusades, apparently healed over and over again by different ministers. Pastor Okafor denied all accusations, stating he had given the woman money as financial assistance, not as payment for staged miracles. He insisted his ministry stood on integrity and that critics were twisting the story to discredit his work. His supporters rallied to his defense, pointing to countless testimonies from people claiming real transformations after attending his services. But the controversy left lingering doubts. If even one miracle was proven fake, what did that mean for the others? How could anyone watching know which events were genuine and which might be rehearsed? For many observers, the issue wasn't just about Chris Okafor himself, but about a larger problem within the world of flashy televangelism. The pressure to draw crowds, raise funds, and stay relevant in a competitive religious landscape can tempt leaders toward theatrics. Whether the allegations against Okafor were true or not, the story fueled debates about accountability, transparency, and the dangers of elevating charisma over character. Penuel Menguni. Prophet Penuel Menguni rose to notoriety across South Africa after leading End Times Disciples Ministries into some of the most shocking controversies the modern church has ever seen. While many pastors gained attention for emotional sermons or supposed healings, Penuel chose a path that left even seasoned observers stunned. Rituals that blurred the line between faith and outright exploitation. His ministry first attracted headlines when photos and videos emerged showing him commanding congregants to eat live snakes, claiming the reptiles would transform into chocolate bars by divine power. These disturbing images spread across social media, drawing outrage from both religious leaders and animal welfare groups. Congregants were seen chewing on writhing snakes, while Penuel proclaimed their faith was being tested. But it didn't stop there. Reports alleged that Penuel forced members to swallow rats, eat grass, and even strip down during certain ceremonies, all in the name of proving spiritual devotion. Critics accused him of preying on vulnerable people desperate for miracles, while his defenders insisted his methods were misunderstood acts of faith. Authorities eventually arrested him on charges of animal cruelty after the snake-eating scandal erupted. Yet despite public condemnation, Penuel initially stood by his actions, claiming that Scripture supported believers overcoming deadly things through faith. Some of his followers even testified they experienced no harm from consuming the snakes, pointing to this as evidence of divine intervention rather than recklessness. In later years, however, Penuel's tone began to change. He reportedly announced that he had repented from the controversial practices, saying he had been influenced by powerful preachers and misinterpreted biblical passages in his early ministry. This shift left many wondering whether his repentance came from genuine conviction or simply from mounting legal pressure and public outrage. Despite his reversal, the legacy of those rituals continues to haunt conversations about him. Religious councils across South Africa cited his ministry as an example of why regulation was needed to prevent rogue pastors from exploiting congregations. Families of former members spoke out about psychological scars, while animal rights groups never forgot the images that first triggered the backlash. Penuel Menguni remains a deeply polarizing figure. To some, he symbolizes the dangers of unchecked spiritual authority, where charisma and theatrics can lead followers into extreme and even harmful acts. To others, his later apology suggests a man who lost his way and tried to correct course before it was too late. Either way, his story forces every believer to wrestle with hard questions about the boundaries of faith, the role of reason, and how far devotion should go when a leader claims divine authority over human lives. Lethabo Rabalago. Lethabo Rabalago, often called the Doom Pastor, shocked the world when images and videos surfaced showing him spraying insecticide directly into the faces of his congregants, claiming it was a divine cure for illness and suffering. Leading Mount Zion General Assembly in Limpopo, South Africa, he insisted that the pesticide branded as Doom was a vessel of God's power to heal everything from HIV to cancer to spiritual oppression. The footage spread rapidly online. Rows of men, women, even children stood obediently while Rabalago held a can of doom like holy water, releasing clouds of toxic chemicals into their eyes, mouths, and skin. As the faithful coughed and winced, he proclaimed they were being delivered from disease and demons. He claimed the act was commanded by God himself, that faith would neutralize the poison, and that miraculous testimonies would follow. But the public reaction was swift and brutal. Health officials condemned the practice as reckless and dangerous, warning that insecticide exposure could cause severe respiratory damage, burns, and even death. Animal rights groups and medical professionals demanded investigations, while the company producing Doom issued statements clarifying the product was strictly for pest control, not human consumption. When questioned by authorities, Rabalago remained defiant, declaring he was being persecuted for obeying divine instructions. Supporters insisted people had experienced real healings, while critics called him a fraud exploiting desperate believers for fame and control. Eventually, legal action was taken. Courts charged Rabalago under health and safety laws, arguing his actions risked lives and violated public welfare regulations. His defense maintained he acted under spiritual conviction, not malice, and that no deaths were directly linked to his services. Nonetheless, the damage to his reputation was irreversible. Videos of congregants choking under pesticide fumes became symbols of the extremes some preachers would go to in the name of miracles. The scandal raised deeper concerns about how far charismatic leaders could push their followers. Why did so many comply willingly, standing in line for insecticide blessings instead of seeking medical care? Sociologists pointed to the powerful psychological grip of religious authority, especially in regions where poverty, illness, and limited healthcare access leave people vulnerable to promises of supernatural healing. Lethabo Rabalago's story remains a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that blind faith without accountability can lead to physical harm, public outrage, and moral questions no sermon can erase. Whether he saw himself as a true prophet or simply a misunderstood zealot, the world will remember him as the man who turned bug spray into a so-called miracle and paid the price when belief collided with reality. Shepherd Bushiri. Shepherd Bushiri, also known as Major One, built one of Africa's most high-profile ministries through the Enlightened Christian Gathering, ECG Church. With branches across multiple countries, his services attracted tens of thousands, often filling stadiums with people seeking healing prophecy and financial breakthroughs. Known for his charismatic preaching and lavish lifestyle, luxury cars, private jets, designer suits, Bushiri presented himself as a modern-day prophet leading a global movement. But his ministry's image began to crack when critics accused him of turning faith into performance. The most infamous moment came when Bushiri released a video claiming he could walk on air. The footage showed him descending a staircase, then appearing to float mid-step before landing on the ground. Supporters cheered, calling it proof of divine power. Skeptics, however, quickly noticed the trick. His shadow on the wall betrayed the illusion, suggesting a staged stunt rather than a supernatural miracle. Other controversies followed. During one service, a supposed prophecy went viral when the man receiving it accidentally revealed he had already spoken with Bushiri's team beforehand. Instead of a divine revelation, it looked like a scripted moment gone wrong. In another incident, Bushiri's church claimed angels had physically appeared during a service only for photos to surface, showing what many believed were poorly edited images. Despite mounting criticism, Bushiri doubled down, portraying himself as a victim of persecution. His followers defended him fiercely, insisting his miracles were real and that attacks came from jealous rivals or unbelievers. Meanwhile, financial investigations accused him of fraud and money laundering, linking his empire to suspicious transactions worth millions. As legal battles intensified, Bushiri fled South Africa for his home country, Malawi, claiming he feared for his life and could not receive a fair trial. Authorities accused him of skipping bail, while supporters framed his escape as divine protection from unjust systems. His dramatic departure fueled international headlines, cementing his image as both a fugitive and a prophet in the eyes of different audiences. Even after fleeing, Bushiri maintained his ministry online, preaching to thousands via live streams and continuing to prophesy financial blessings, healings, and miracles. Yet critics argue that his legacy is defined less by faith than by spectacle air-walking stunts, questionable prophecies, and court cases rather than spiritual depth. Whether Shepherd Bushiri is remembered as a persecuted man of God or a master showman exploiting faith for fame and fortune depends on who tells the story. But one thing is certain, his name will forever spark debate about the thin line between divine calling and deception in modern megachurch culture. Jeremiah Omoto Fufayan. Prophet Jeremiah Omoto Fufayan, founder of the Christ Mercyland Deliverance Ministry in Warri, Nigeria, built one of the country's most talked-about churches. Known for massive crusades, dramatic deliverance sessions, and high-energy preaching, he cultivated an image as a powerful man of God with a direct line to the supernatural. Thousands flocked to his services seeking healing, prophecy, and miracles that for a time seemed to define his ministry. But over the years, questions about his methods grew louder. Critics accused him of staging miracles to draw crowds and boost his influence. One viral moment showed him performing a prophecy where the divine revelation looked suspiciously scripted. Observers noted how he prodded a woman for answers, then turned the scene into a confrontation when she didn't respond as expected. Viewers wondered whether they were witnessing genuine spiritual insight or theater designed to impress the faithful. Then came the allegations of fake resurrections. Videos circulated online showing supposed dead individuals brought back to life during his services. Skeptics pointed out inconsistencies. The deceased often looked too prepared for the moment, their families too calm, the timing too perfect. As footage spread, many concluded these miracles were staged performances aimed at boosting the prophet's reputation rather than glorifying God. Jeremiah's defenders insisted he was under spiritual attack, that critics edited videos to discredit his work, and that countless people had experienced real healings under his ministry. Yet the accusations persisted, fueled by witnesses claiming they were offered money to participate in miracle dramas. Jeremiah often responded by framing himself as a victim of envy and persecution, saying his ministry was too successful not to attract enemies. He maintained that God called him to deliver people from sickness, poverty, and spiritual bondage, and that critics misunderstood the power of modern-day prophecy. Meanwhile, his church continued to expand with enormous auditoriums, lavish stage productions, and televised services, reaching millions across Africa and beyond. Yet this growth also fueled suspicion, how much of it came from sincere belief, and how much from the spectacle surrounding his name. For many Nigerians, Jeremiah Omoto Fufayan represents both the promise and the peril of charismatic revivalism. On one hand, he embodies the hope people cling to in desperate times, a man claiming to channel divine power in a hurting world. On the other, he raises uncomfortable questions about accountability, performance, and profit inside modern megachurches. Whether seen as a true prophet or a master showman, Jeremiah's legacy forces believers and skeptics alike to confront the tension between faith and evidence, charisma and credibility, miracles and manipulation. 13 pastors, countless claims, and one undeniable truth. Faith and controversy often walk the same stage. From miracle kisses to insecticide healings, each story leaves us questioning where belief ends and manipulation begins. Were these men and women visionaries of modern spirituality, Or master performers exploiting hope for fame and fortune? The lines blur when cameras roll, miracles go viral, and money changes hands. So what do you think? Are these scandals proof of corruption in the pulpit or attacks on genuine faith? Let the debate begin on legends of Black excellence.